Talking with Governor Reagan, what would you say was your worst movie?
That's very easy to answer. I could answer.
People are always asked their favorite.
And I heard you speculating a little while ago out here while I was off stage, speculating about what it's like to watch your movies as the hours go on late into the night.
Yes.
It's a little like watching a son you never knew you had.
You see yourself as a young man.
Yeah. I've got friends in the business that sit up to look at their old shows to watch their hairline recede. But the worst movie I have never seen.
Oh.
To this day. I made a picture. See, when you started in this business back in that golden era, they had a thing called the B unit, B studio. And I became the hero of the Bs for a while at Warner Brothers. It was the Gipper part that broke me out of that and into different kind of picture.
Yeah.
But I made some that they didn't, well, I was like an Errol Flynn in a low budget sort of way. And this picture was called Code of the Secret Service.
Well, that sounds terrific.
Some people, some friends of mine have tried to trick me into a projection room a couple of times to see it.
Well, we have a little surprise for you.
Don't you dare.
We don't, but it would have been a nice trick, wouldn't it?
Of course, part of it, part of the blame was on us. The director and myself, we got mad at the producer. And usually in those things, they expected you to patch things up on the set. You know, that you'd look at the script and you'd say, you can't do that. And so you'd kind of cook it up and it'd come out a little better than it had been written. And this one, we got mad at the producer and the director and I made up our minds we would shoot it exactly as it was written.
And that was the worst thing you could do to them.
Oh, I want to tell you, it reached a real low spot when the villain shoots me and then walks away and leaves me for dead, and I take a book, which is a Spanish-American dictionary, I just happened to be in Mexico at the time, out of my pocket, and I say to the book, if you ever need an endorsement, call on me. And then I put it in my hip pocket, I suppose, in case he shoots me while I'm going away. And
book saved your life. What about Bedtime for Bonzo? That's one of my favorite films you were ever in.
Well, now listen, the funny thing is Bedtime for Bonzo was quite a box office smash, and the funny thing is it proved a rule of comedy, that it was a good picture. It was a very funny comedy because it was based on truth. It was based on the type of experiments that they've been doing at Duke University with chimps. And the idea was, I was a psychology professor, and I was trying to raise a chimp as you would a baby and see how far up you could bring it in intelligence before it slowed down and a child would go ahead. So it was being raised in my home and clothed and with a crib and all the bit. And Bonzo, the night the picture opened, Bonzo died in a fire out at Jungle Land.
The Bonzo who played the part?
Yeah.
Oh, that's sad.
And I hated that because he and I, we had a very great understanding. We got along just fine.
That's a sad story.
It was a good picture. Then to show you the other rule of comedy they violated, they made a sequel, which I'm happy to say I wasn't in, called Bonzo Goes to College. And Hollywood did this a lot. If a picture made money, they would immediately come back with a sequel, but somehow they never seemed to be able to realize what it was that made the first one good. Now, the first one was based, as I say, on a basic sound premise. The second one, when they tried to have you believe that a chimp could make the college football team, it was burlesquing burlesque. And as you know, in comedy, it never works.
Are there any colleges that you think a chimp could make the... I'm leaving you wide open here.
Well, no, because I've never had any quarrel with the football players. I happen to have a strong affinity and a belief in the kind of guy that's playing football today.
Why are so many...
I know of some that I think could hold some administrative positions in some campuses.
I was wondering if you might say that. Why are people leaving the state for the first time in history? I was surprised to hear this fact, but I always grew up knowing that people were moving by the rate of 400 a day to California or something, and I believe that this year, for the first time, they're hauling out of here.
Well, being someone who predicted that, I'm not I've not been too surprised. There've always been people leaving. While we've always had them coming in, they've been coming in faster. But there's been an exchange. The balance was in our favor. But I think what happened is when a state grows to the size of California and has large urban centers, it loses some of the appeal that was bringing the people here. The people were coming here in a kind of a pioneering sense. It was a new frontier, a new start, new jobs and futures and so forth. Now when you grow up to being the most populous state in the Union, you lose some of that, and you find people here leaving for the same reason they're leaving states back there. They're going to Alaska, Arizona, Oregon, or Washington.
To get what they used to get here.
That's right.
Less concrete and
a
asphalt.
new start.
There was once upon a time that to be a Republican in this area of the country felt a little bit like being Gary Cooper in High Noon, outnumbered in a big way. But I remember the story of a fellow who was running for office as a Republican, and he was in a rural area and that wasn't known to be Republican, and he stopped by a farm to do some campaigning. And when the farmer heard he was a Republican, his jaw dropped, and he said, "Wait right here till I go get Ma. She's never seen a Republican before." So he got her, and the candidate looked around for a podium from which to give his speech, and the only thing he could find was a pile of that stuff that Bess Truman took 35 years trying to get Harry to call fertilizer. So he got up on the mound, and when they came back, he gave his speech. And at the end of it, the farmer said, "That's the first time I ever heard a Republican speech." And the candidate said, "That's the first time I've ever given a Republican speech from a Democratic platform." I've been collecting stories that are told in the Soviet Union by their people among themselves, which reveal they've got a great sense of humor, but they've also got a pretty cynical attitude toward their system. And I told this one, Bill, you'll have to hear it again. I told it in the car. I didn't tell this one to Gorbachev. You know, there's a 10-year delay in the Soviet Union of delivery of an automobile. And only 1 out of 7 families in the Soviet Union own automobiles. There's a 10-year wait. And you go through quite a process when you're ready to buy, and then you put up the money in advance. And this happened to a fella, and this is their story that they tell, this joke, that this man, he laid down his money, and then the fella that was in charge said to him, "Okay, come back in 10 years and get your car." And he said, "Morning or afternoon?" And the fellow behind the counter said, "Well, 10 years from now, what difference does it make?" And he said, "Well, the plumber's coming in the morning." I just want to... Oh, I can't resist. I'm supposed to quit right here. But, oh yes. But in view of the fast things that I just said, I don't know whether you know it or not, but I have a new hobby. I am collecting stories that I can actually prove are told among the Russian people. They make them up themselves, they tell them between themselves, reveals they got a great sense of humor, and they've also got a little cynical attitude about things in their country. And one of these stories, the one I'm going to tell you, I told to General Secretary Gorbachev, and he laughed. The story was an American and a Russian arguing about their two countries, and the American said, "Look, in my country, I can walk into the Oval Office, I can pound the president's desk and say, 'Mr. President, I don't like the way you're running our country.'" And the Russian said, "I can do that." The American said, "You can?" He says, "Yes. I can go into the Kremlin to the General Secretary's office, pound his desk and say, 'Mr. General Secretary, I don't like the way President Reagan's running his country.'" You know, less than 1 family out of 7 in the Soviet Union owns an automobile. Most of the automobiles are driven by the bureaucrats. The government furnishes them and drivers and so forth. So an order went out one day to the police that anyone caught speeding, anyone, no matter who, gets a ticket. Well, Gorbachev came out of his country home, his dacha. He was late getting to the Kremlin. There was his limousine and driver waiting. He told the driver to get in the back seat, he'd drive, and down the road he went. They passed 2 motorcycle cops. One took out after him. And pretty soon he's back with his buddy, and his buddy says, well, did you give him a ticket? And he said, no. Well, he said, why not? Oh, he said, to him, important. Well, he said, we're told to give anybody a ticket, no matter who it is. Oh, he said, no, this one was, I could. Well, he said, who was it? He said, I couldn't recognize him, but his driver was Gorbachev. One of the more recent ones that I heard was about the man walking along the street at night, Moscow. Soviet soldier called to him to halt. He started to run. The soldier shot him. And another man said, why did you do that? Well, he said, curfew. Well, he said, it isn't curfew yet. He said, I know. He's a friend of mine. I know where he lives. He couldn't have made it. I heard one about a fellow who went to the KGB to report that he lost his parrot. The KGB asked him why he was bothering them. Why didn't he just report it to the local police? Well, he answered, I just want you to know that I don't agree with a thing my parrot has to say. Which makes me think of a story. Everything makes me think of a story. About 3 dogs, an American dog and a Polish dog and a Russian dog. They were all having a visit, and the American dog was telling them about how things were in this country. He said, you know, you bark, and you bark long enough, and then somebody comes along and gives you some meat. And the Polish dog said, what's meat? The Russian dog says, what's bark? I have to interrupt right here and tell you that in one of my visits, I won't name him, I don't want to embarrass him, but one of the heads of state that I met with on this visit, he gave me one while I was on the way. Told me the story about the 2 fellows in the Soviet Union that were walking down the street, and the one of them says, have we really achieved full communism? Is this it? Is this now full communism? And the other one said, oh, hell no, things are going to get a lot worse.
Governor Reagan, you're on record as having supported the Senator Goldwater when he was running for president. One of the things he said was extremism was about extremism and liberty. Now, how do you see any essential difference between saying this and as Stokely Carmichael saying to hell with the laws of this country, and those two sayings as extreme, as each, and they're both extreme. And when you talk about Red China giving up some of its hostile sayings, would you give up this saying, which is patently hostile?
Well, I don't think there was anything hostile in what he said. Actually, I could have questioned whether that was the time and place to say it. He was paraphrasing a very famous remark that goes back, I guess, to Cicero. And what he was paraphrasing...
Indeed.
He was paraphrasing in that statement the idea of all-out defense of virtue, all-out defense of liberty, and that there was, I would think that a soldier who died in World War II fighting Hitlerism had gone all the way out in his defense of what we believe to be right and moral, virtuous, and certainly in defense of freedom. Now, to turn this...
Excuse me, sir. Could you substitute communism for virtue, and you see the deadlock which it would produce?
Chairs try to get the other candidates to leave. They don't. The fireworks begin.
If we may have the first question, Mr. Green, before the question, you asked me if you could make an announcement first. And I asked you for permission to make an announcement myself.
Would the sound man please turn Mr. Reagan's mic off for a minute?
Is this on? Mr. Green,
Would you turn that microphone
you
off,
asked for me if you would... I am paying for this microphone, Mr. Green.